Welcome back to Field Notes, the infrastructure podcast, where we dig into the backbone of modern connectivity, from fiber optics to broadband, and then everything in between. I'm your host, Abby Crawford, and today we are diving into one of the most ambitious broadband initiatives in U.S. history, the BEAD program. Joining us is someone who's been at the heart of this transformation, Evan Feinman from NTIA. Evan's been instrumental in shaping broadband policy both in Virginia and also at the national level. Evan, welcome to Field Notes.
Thanks a lot, Abby. Happy to talk.
Awesome. So first, I want to just get to know you and your journey, your experience first, Evan. So can you just talk to us about your journey and what led you to broadband?
Absolutely. So I've done a ton of stuff over the course of my career. I was doing energy and transportation policy work throughout the northeastern states and in DC. I went to law school. I'm not much of a lawyer. Call somebody else if you need one. I spent some time on campaigns. I worked at a budget and fiscal policy think tank for a little while. I was policy director on Governor McAuliffe's campaign, one of his successful campaigns in Virginia, and was deputy secretary of natural resources for a little while. And he asked me then to take over a struggling economic development agency, the Tobacco Region Revitalization Commission, which is focused on growing and diversifying the economy of Southern and Southwest Virginia. The agency had some challenges over the years. It really needed a reform and turnaround. And I am not in the habit of saying no to governors. And so I went and took that on, whipped the organization into shape, and we had some really good outcomes there. But one of the things that was a consistent challenge was we were doing everything right according to the economic playbook as we understood it. We had really strong sites, we had competitive incentive packages, we had strong and well-characterized workforces, and we were missing on a bunch of projects that we really thought we were going to land. And I, one or two, sure, right? The cookie didn't crumble your direction. But after more than that, I started reaching out to site selectors and C-suite folks who were deciders. And what I was hearing back from a number of them was, we liked a lot about your pitch, but we didn't want to put our facility in a place that didn't have access to high-speed internet. And I said, no, there's fiber right at the industrial site. And they said, yeah, at the office there'd be fiber, but we need to be able to email our plant manager at 7 a.m. and say, like, we got a board meeting set this morning. We need answers to these questions. And that was sort of this light bulb moment for me. And I said, man, this is a critical utility if we're going to be able to grow economies in the places where there currently isn't ubiquitous broadband. And then I really started digging in further, and you learn all of these bad outcomes that accrue to communities that don't have access to high-speed internet, right? Kids get worse GPAs, they're less likely to attend post-secondary education, the healthcare impacts on the residents, the fact that the elderly can't age in places safely. There's all of these negative events that happen. And so, my agency had a lot of flexibility. Really, if anything I could persuade my board to do, we could do. And we had, several $100 million in the bank. And so we really started investing very heavily just directly through that agency in broadband, wound up laying about 3,000 miles of fiber, building a bunch of towers throughout rural Virginia. And then, I was in dialogue with the lieutenant governor of Virginia at the time, Ralph Northam, who was running for governor. And, I was talking with him a lot about his campaign. I was the former policy director on the prior winning gubernatorial, right? So, I'm having a lot of conversations with him about his platform. And he ended up making, as one of his top priorities, universal broadband access in Virginia. I was actually planning on leaving government at the end of the McAuliffe administration, and Governor Northam asked me to stay, asked me to continue to run the economic development agency that I was running, but also to serve as his chief broadband advisor. That was supposed to be a second full-time job as it was sort of budgeted. I just sort of did both of them, which was great. A lot of work, but a lot of fun. And we did pretty well in Virginia. Virginia remains the first large state in the union that's on track to achieve universal broadband connectivity. And at the conclusion of the Northam administration, I got outreach from NTIA. They said, we're setting up this BEAD program. A lot of the statute was based on the work that you guys were doing in Virginia, as well as the work that was happening in some other states that were advanced on the broadband issue. And it was a really exciting couple of year journey building the BEAD program.
That's amazing. It's so funny to me the amount of people that don't initially, like, I haven't talked to many people that say, yeah, when I graduated high school, I wanted to get into this industry. And it's really cool to hear the different backgrounds that people come from. And it just shows that when people see the importance of what it is that we're doing, they pursue it,
Yeah,
which
absolutely. I mean, I think it's hard to get seriously engaged with any big part of American life or the American economy without at some point realizing how critical our digital infrastructure is to making everything work. But yeah, you're right. I mean, there's not a lot of kids. I've got a 6-year-old son, right? Like he wants to be a fireman. He doesn't want to be a network engineer. That's just the way things work, right? Like, I would be very curious to meet the young person who really wanted to work in broadband infrastructure who didn't like have a parent that was already doing that.
right. I completely agree. So now that we know you, I want to kick things off and just talk about the big picture of everything going on. Can you give us a quick overview of the BEAD program and its goals?
Sure. So the BEAD program is an incredibly ambitious undertaking. It was authorized by the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act that then President Biden signed. It was, which was a bipartisan piece of legislation. It allocated $42.5 billion out of a total $60 billion investment in America's digital infrastructure toward this new model and new approach to making sure that every single American has access to a reliable, affordable, high-speed internet connection. The big changes from prior federal broadband efforts are one, the goal of getting everybody online, which previously was not regarded as achievable, and two, the model. Every other federal broadband effort has really been a top-down endeavor that was really directed out of the federal government, generally the FCC, sometimes USDA, sometimes NTIA, and it was about federal employees making deals with ISPs, not including state and local governments, not including stakeholders in anywhere near the way that the BEAD program does. Within the BEAD program, NTIA makes grants to states. So the whole BEAD program, all 42.5 billion, only ever makes 56 grants to the 56 states and territories that are eligible for the program. Those states and territories then write proposals, which are the way they will navigate the federal rule set to identify projects that they can enter into public-private partnership to build to close the digital divide. And so each state gets their allocation, their cut of that $42.5 billion pie, and then they sub-grant, they cut into pieces and hand out little forks, their slice of pie out to every single ISP that applies to build broadband infrastructure within their state and territory to get to universal coverage. That's a really complicated and hard thing to do. Less than a third of U.S. states even had a state broadband office prior to the BEAD program commencing. And so there was a lot of work to be done to upskill and resource those state broadband offices, to get people familiar with the new rule sets, both at the federal level and at each of the states, and to continue to meet the challenge of standing up an entire new program. I mean, when I got hired, I was it. There wasn't anybody on the BEAD team. There were other people who were in NTIA who were excellent, who were supporting the program, but I had to identify and hire staff to serve and support every single state and territory. And then we had to staff up across the agency really dramatically. I mean, a bunch of new council folks, a bunch of new communications people, a bunch of new policy people, a bunch of new technical assistance people. And it was a real privilege to work with that team. The folks that are supporting the states are some of the most hardworking and talented people that I know. The policy team was really, really, really remarkable. The technical assistance team as well, really, 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 and leadership was great. I mean, Alan Davidson, the assistant secretary, Doug Kinkoff, who was my immediate superior, really, really, really remarkable people. And so it was a great team to be a part of.
It's so encouraging to hear that the leadership is so passionate about what you're doing, because that makes all the difference. And it is such a huge undertaking, but it's clearly needed. With that, with any large scale infrastructure effort, I imagine that the road is not all smooth and there are struggles. And it sounds like there was right off the bat with even building a team to do this. What are some of the biggest challenges that deploying broadband at scale has presented?
Well, there are a bunch. The first is just to recognize that this is a really hard thing to do. The closest policy analog is rural electrification. And it's worth noting that when rural electrification was passed into law in 1939, they thought it would take years. Boy, were they right. By 1949, they hadn't connected half of the farmsteads across the country. And in fact, rural electrification, which again signed into law in 1939, did not wrap up until the 70s. We had a much more aggressive timeline for BEAD. And so, we really, all of this stuff is going to get built before 2030, which again, it's funny. On the one hand, that's really moving at breakneck speed. We had to work with FCC to generate a huge map. We had to allocate these funds. We had to build resources. You had to make sure 56 states and territories had strong compliant plans. And then the industry then they've got to make all their subgrants and the industry has to build. And it's got to all get done. That's really, really, really quick, build tens of billions of dollars worth of infrastructure across literally millions of square miles of territory. At the same time, it's still pretty slow, right? I mean, it's tough to tell a parent who's got a kid entering high school, yeah, maybe we're going to have service by the time that kid heads off to college. I mean, the timelines are challenging. So that's the first, is that the world presented us with a lot of challenges. The second is that a lot of politics came into play. You've got every single governor, each of whom has their own agenda, each of whom has their own set of priorities. The states are all in very different places. The maps are better, but remain imperfect. Everybody in industry has their own view, right? Wireless guys say we can do it the best. The fiber folks say we can do it the best. You've now got, low Earth orbit satellite, which, has really thrown a new wrinkle into the puzzle. And then we had a change of administration. And so the Trump administration came in, kind of at the 11th hour and really made some dramatic changes to the program in ways that, I expressed fairly publicly that I disagreed with. But look, elections have consequences. The new administration gets to put their stamp on the approach they're taking, even if I, personally don't always think the decisions they're making are the right ones.
So you mentioned the complexity of large scale deployment, and something we see firsthand in the field. How important is it to have engineering partners who understand both the technical and regulatory landscape when executing these BEAD funded projects? Because, like you said, every state is different.
Critically important. I mean, the thing that nobody who's not in the industry really understands, and this is a challenge when it comes to educating policymakers, when it comes to explaining to members of Congress, to governors, why some of this is so challenging. Every single network build is a custom build. There is no cookie cutter approach that you can drop on. The topography is different, the foliage is different, the existing network connectivity is different, the technologies that people are using are different. And so you really need to have trusted partners. And we encouraged the states to really take a critical look at both the managerial and technical capacity of all of the companies that they were looking to work with as they were working to figure out, look, people can make all kinds of promises, right? I could walk into a state office and say, if you give me $50 million, I'm going to build a fiber network. Well, I've never done that, right? I mean, I've done other neat stuff, right? And so probably if it's just Evan driving around in his sedan, you shouldn't give that guy tens of millions of dollars to build a network, right? There's no evidence I can do it.
Right.
But the state offices did a really great job vetting their applicants, and the plans that we've seen, by and large, are pretty strong.
That's good. Whether it's permitting, workforce, supply chain, there is a lot to juggle with all of this. And while deployment is critical, so is making sure that we're not leaving anyone
Mhm.
behind. I would love to hear how the program is ensuring that rural, low income, and historically marginalized areas are getting the attention that they deserve.
Well, so that's an area where I really take issue with the choices that the new administration is making. The way the BEAD program was designed and operated gave each state discretion, but each state worked with their own internet service providers to develop a low income service offering, effectively to say if somebody's poor, we're only and the public builds gives them an ISP money to build a network. That ISP is then going to offer a lower cost plan to those folks. And so
Mm-hmm.
most states came up with an approach where they said, all right, we're going to set a price at one level. We're going to say you're going to offer poor families, $40 a month service. But if you come to us and you show us that, like, look, this is just too remote, the cost to operate the infrastructure is too high, we'll give you a waiver up to 50 or $60. I think the highest in any state was 70 something dollars.
Okay.
And what we saw was that, and look, there was a lot of back and forth about that. But the law required that there be a low income service offering or a low cost service offering. And that's what NTIA did. NTIA never picked the number. We always left it up to the state to decide in concert with their industry partners what they thought the right number was going to be. And I don't think too many states got that wrong. To the extent states did, by and large, it wasn't that they were too permissive. There were folks on the left who were very concerned that states were going to, really allow folks to overcharge. I do think a couple of states got out a little over their skis. If you make that number too small, it gets very hard for industry to make money. And
Right.
Even when you're working with folks like electric cooperatives, as a friend of mine, Gary Wood, who's the CEO of the Central Virginia Electric Cooperative, reminded me one time when we were in dialogue about this stuff. He said, look, being not for profit, Evan, is not the same as being for loss. And you really can't expect people to come in and do things that are going to lose them money. And so I think by and large the states did an excellent job of that. And one of the things that really disappointed me was the Trump administration coming in and wiping all that work away, and instead saying that no particular low cost price would be set anywhere. That there would just be a promise from industry that they would offer cheaper rates to some low income folks. I don't have a lot of confidence that that'll come together. I think to the extent ISPs wanted to do that, they already are. I do think some of the large ISPs, to their credit, do a nice job there. I call them out often because they get a lot of heat in other contexts, but like Comcast with their Internet Essentials program is a really, really, really great service. It's $10 a month for high quality connectivity for low income folks. Cox also has a good, I think they're $15 a month. They're very strong. And I believe AT&T has a good low income proposal. So that, there's a set of them that do it, but a bunch of other folks are not going to do it. And I think I'm one of the areas I really disagree with this administration's choices is on that specific thing of eliminating the low cost service option effectively.
So you have had a front row seat to all of this, and especially in Virginia because that is where you live.
Mm-hmm.
And they've been a leader in broadband expansion, which is awesome. So I would love to know, are there any specific wins or the other side, any missteps that have shaped how BEAD is being implemented across the country?
Yeah, a few things. I mean, first, I think the idea that local coordination is critical really lived through the whole program. In Virginia, we recognized early that we had to stop doing things at communities and instead start doing things with communities. And
love that.
yeah,
That's great.
well, I mean, it just, we don't know better, right? And that really ran through the whole program. Was we tried to be humble. I was saying often when I was at the state level, look, UDC guys don't know better than we do what we need in Virginia. But then in Virginia, we recognized that we didn't know in Richmond necessarily better than a county administrator or a technology director in that county about their community.
Right.
And so we really tried to push those lessons out as much as we could. We
Hmm.
also tried to preserve flexibility. Um, and we tried to work early and often on getting folks ready to deal with permitting challenges. It's really hard to deal
Mm.
often to get access to state right of way or to cross government owned territory. And that's when it's a state partner. When it's a federal partner, it's even harder. There's this really, really, really talented woman, Jill Springer, who we hired at NTIA. Brilliant attorney, knows more about permitting than I'll ever know, hopefully. And she designed this amazing tool. She's got a growing team there at NTIA that is really going to be, when all this stuff actually gets built over the next 4 and 5 years. I hope somebody builds a statue of Jill Springer, because if it all gets built, it'll be built in large
Aw.
part because of the incredible work that she put together, making getting permits achieved possible. On the downside, right, on the things that make things harder, one group of people, and I say this recognizing the historic import that this industry has in American history, but one of the actors who's consistently hard to deal with are the railroads. Um,
Mhm.
Railroads own land, as one might expect, in long strips, right? I mean, where the tracks are. And very, very frequently, you've got to get from one side of it to the other. And boy, is that challenging and expensive. The large American railroads have, by and large, outsourced um, their crossing agreements and negotiations to these third parties. And the way the third parties are compensated is they get a cut of whatever fee they're able to extract from the ISP for crossing the tracks. And that really creates an incentive structure that incents that third party to try to squeeze as much money as they can out of an ISP so they get their cut. And I saw examples of that over and over again, where there'd be a build and there would be six houses. This is a real thing that happened in Southwest Virginia. There were six houses on the other side of a railroad track, and there was already one fiber crossing the track, but it didn't have capacity, so they needed to overlash another cable just to that one that already existed. So it had already been engineered. They literally just needed to attach another fiber to the wire that was there. The price they were quoted by the railroad uh, for getting service to those six homes was $60,000 a year. That is nuts.
Wow.
They're gonna be charging those six houses, if they had a 100% take rate and all six houses were paying them, they're going to be charging those houses like $55 a month. They were never, that was just didn't work. And when they said that that's impossible, the railroad company came back and said, okay, how about 30? um, which was really good evidence that this wasn't being driven by any real costs that the railroad had. They were just purely seeing it as a profit generation
Interesting. Yeah.
opportunity. And a set of states have passed legislation, um, basically putting shot clocks on those and cost recovery limits on those that I think is overdue. And I hope every state in the union adopts a similar approach. I'm not at all opposed to railroads making money. I'm not at all sorry that
Hmm.
the mailman just came and my dog is defending the house.
That's
Uh,
okay. I didn't hear him.
I'm not at all opposed to railroads making money. Railroads provide a critical service, good companies, right? But they've got to be reasonable in the cost that they're able to impose upon these bills.
Absolutely. And I think that the infrastructure landscape is evolving so fast. And so I think people are
Yes.
trying to just keep up with that. So how do you think that these innovations will influence how we plan and build broadband networks for the future? Because we can't go back and fix
Right.
what's already been done, like you're saying, but what can we do going forward? Um,
Well, a couple of things. One is, I hope every single infrastructure program takes a look at the way NTIA is approaching environmental and historic protection permitting, because I think it's getting pretty close to. I actually think those entire legal edifices are ripe for restructuring. But within the law as it exists, I think that'll be really hard. I don't have a high confidence that Congress is going to revisit the National Environmental Protection Act in a positive way. So recognizing that legal structure is not going to change, I hope people will look across all infrastructure, will look at what NTIA has built in terms of the best possible version of NEPA and NHP permitting, because I don't think it could be any better than that. The second thing is I hope states will take seriously the idea that we as a society are overspending on engineering basically every single time one piece of infrastructure interacts with another piece of infrastructure. You shouldn't need a highway engineer and a telecom engineer to both come sign off on somebody attaching a a piece of conduit to a highway overpass, right? Like what we need to do is create cross training and mutual indemnification structures that allow a single multiply certified engineer to come do that one touch approach. And there have been some positive strides made on one touch make ready, but not enough. And the last piece is poles. We've badly gotta routinize pole attachments. FCC has kind of put its toes in the water there, but as is pretty common in the federal context, the structure that they've got to navigate pole attachment agreements is itself really bloated and bureaucratic and slow moving and hard to deal with. And you know what I think would make things a lot simpler is a really straightforward property depreciation and value based approach to how pole attachments work that allows for the pole owners to actually get paid for new costs that are imposed by infrastructure that gets put on them, but doesn't allow pole owners that haven't been doing good maintenance to pass deferred maintenance costs on to pole attachers. And splitting that difference and getting it right is something that'll be hard to do, but if you do it once, you never have to do it again.
Exactly. Bingo. That's where I was going next. As we look ahead, it feels like the future of broadband is going to require even tighter coordination, which is exactly what you're saying, from policy, planning to execution. Do you see a growing role for engineering firms, not just on how we build, but how we plan for resilience and innovation in broadband networks?
A tremendous role. So one of the things that's a big open question about the program right now is there are going to be all these what are called non-deployment funds. So states, a large number of states are going to be able to complete their infrastructure mission without spending all of the money that they were allocated within the BEAD program. A great use of those resources would be increasing our network resilience and increasing the ability of the networks to serve to make our communities safer. I would love to see NTIA release a framework that lays out how to use funds to, for example, build conduit networks as they're doing in Puerto Rico to underground existing infrastructure. I would love to see, and by the way, while you've got the trench open, you know, if you can bring other infrastructure down there, do that too, right? You know, let's work with the electrical guys. Let's get that stuff underground. I also think additional redundancy is going to be really critical, and additional multimodal redundancy is going to be really critical. We do a pretty good job in this country planning for known disasters that have happened before. But what we don't do a great job of is figuring out how we're going to deal with things that haven't happened before, especially when those disasters are man-made. It's all well and good to say, you know, we've got 3 different separate routes into this mission critical hyperscale data center. Surely a storm won't knock down trees or cut the fibers in all 3 routes. It's like, okay, but what about 3 guys with chainsaws who mean to do it? What are we going to do about that? Is there some kind of backup plan? The same is true with malicious foreign actors. I can't talk a lot about it, right? But I received a bunch of information about attacks that are happening on American networks that are really worrisome. And the kind of networks that we're going to need in the future, as more and more parts of our society become reliant on our digital infrastructure, it's absolutely critical that we harden where we need to harden, but also introduce resiliency and anti-fragility planning into our networks. And then the last piece is we've got to do a lot more with mobile and wireless, both so that you can get a good cell signal everywhere in this country. And I think the low Earth orbit satellite networks have a huge part to play there, but also to support the safety of our first responders. There are tons of, I was just talking actually at Mountain Connect in Denver earlier this week with a network operator who was in dialogue with sheriff's deputies in a rural county, and it wasn't a network operator. It was Chris Ali, the really 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 brilliant telecom professor from Penn State, who was saying he was talking to a sheriff's deputy who, when he wants to pull somebody over and he's in a dead zone, he sometimes has to follow people for miles and miles and miles through central Pennsylvania. Wow. Until he can pull them over somewhere where he can safely communicate with his systems. Because if you pull somebody over, probably they're fine, right? But that cop needs to be able to run that plate and figure out if the person they just pulled over is armed and dangerous. And in the absence of good connectivity, they can't do that in huge parts of this country. And so for reasons related to economic security, a healthy populace, a safe populace, a growing populace, our economic future, it's absolutely critical. It would be irresponsible not to invest really heavily in resiliency, redundancy, and anti-fragility in our telecom networks.
I could not be more pleased with how you just answered that question, because that is exactly why I have this podcast, is to just express the importance of what we do in the day-to-day. Because even for someone that is in the industry, I didn't even think about a police officer needing to wait until they get to a safe spot. I mean, my brother's a firefighter, and so that didn't even cross my mind. But it's so important, and that's exactly why these conversations are important, and being vocal about what we're doing. It's more than just.
Absolutely. And think about the innovations. Once we've got these networks really strong, think about the sorts of innovations that could support the work your brother's doing, right? So you could see a future where firefighters have enough network capacity that when they pull up to a structure fire, they can pull the structure plan, they can connect that up to a HUD display in a visor, and they can see okay, there's a gas line coming in here, and there's where the fire is, and we got to move it. We can approach the burn this way, and that that'll save a lot of firefighter lives. That'll save a lot of property damage. That'll save a lot of citizen lives. But none of that'll work if we don't have a digital infrastructure that's actually going to be functional, right? And ding, ding. That's what we absolutely have to have that.
Amen. Digital infrastructure is a successful digital infrastructure is our future, and there's so much that we can do with that in everyday 100%. Life, in every career, and the jobs like your son. You said he wanted to be a fireman. I mean, someday, hopefully, he has those capabilities that you were just talking about.
Yeah.
So cool. Evan, this has been such a rich conversation. I'm so grateful for your insights and just being able to connect the dots for us between policy and real world. Is there anything that you want to share, any calls to action to our viewers before we wrap it up?
No, in a lot of other contexts, I've talked about issues I have with the current administration's implementation of the program. That is what it is, right? Folks are happy to. I don't need to talk about that every time. People are welcome to read those comments of mine. I would say that state final proposals are going to be coming out for public comment over the next several months, next couple of months. Virginia's and Louisiana's are already out. I really encourage people to be attentive to that and share their comments with their state offices as we move forward to getting shovels in the ground, which hopefully will happen within the next year. The only other thing I'll say is there's a whole lot going on in this space, and I really encourage people to, if they're concerned or confused about anything that's going on, reach out to your federal program officer from NTIA who's in your state. Reach out to your state broadband office, and people are welcome to reach out to me. I am very happy to share my expertise and time with folks that are trying to navigate these waters.
Thank you so much, Evan. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. You heard Evan. Be vocal. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your network. Until next time, that's it from the field. Stay grounded.